She had the perfect marriage, the perfect home, the perfect life, until a stranger called her phone one afternoon and introduced herself as her husband's girlfriend. Most women would have cried. Most women would have begged. But this woman? She said two words that changed everything. Thank you. And what she did next, Ryan and Vanessa never saw coming. She had everything the world told her to want. A beautiful home above the city lights. A successful husband. Elegant dinner parties where everyone smiled and no one looked too closely. From the outside, Emma Parker's life looked perfect, but perfection, she was learning, can be the loneliest place in the world. Late nights, she would sit on the edge of their bed, fully dressed, waiting for a man who no longer came home the same way he used to. For the past year, Ryan had been changing. The late meetings, the unexpected trips, the phone calls he always took in another room, voice low and careful. Emma noticed every single thing. She just chose to believe him, because that is what trust looks like until it doesn't. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Emma was at her desk, her world of numbers and contracts, the one place she remained entirely in control. When her phone lit up, unknown number, she nearly ignored it. Something made her answer. Hello. And then a woman's voice. Soft, confident, almost amused. The kind of voice that knows it is about to change someone's life. My name is Vanessa. The name meant nothing. Not yet. But Emma's body knew before her mind did. Her grip on the phone tightened just a little. Dinner was wonderful last night. Ryan took me to that little Italian restaurant downtown. He ordered the same wine he always orders. And there was the sentence that turned everything inside out. The stomach drop. The cold flood of realization. Emma stood up without meaning to. I've been seeing your husband for almost a year. The world stopped. She stared at the city without seeing it. A whole year. The word no escaped her lips the way air escapes a collapsing room. Automatically, desperately. But Vanessa sounded delighted. Am I? And then the notification. A text. An image. With hands that she had to force steady, Emma opened it. There was Ryan, her husband, kissing another woman. The date stamp read 3 days ago. 3 days ago, while she was sitting in this same office, in this same chair, trusting him with everything she had. Vanessa's voice returned, wrapped in false sympathy, but dripping with satisfaction. I just thought you deserved to know. Ryan will leave you soon anyway. I wanted to save everyone some time. This was not honesty. This was not kindness. This was a woman calling to win, to humiliate, to watch something break. Emma closed her eyes. Just for a moment. The pain was enormous, the kind that fills every room you'll ever walk into for weeks afterward. But here is what Vanessa didn't understand about Emma Parker. Pain was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a plan. When she opened her eyes, something had changed. The glass in her gaze had cleared. The trembling had stopped. And when she spoke, slowly, quietly, with a calm so complete it silenced the other woman entirely, she said, "Thank you for calling." Vanessa hesitated. "What?" "Thank you." And then Emma smiled. Not the warm smile from the dinner party photographs. Not the practice smile for social media. This was the other kind. The kind that lives just ahead of a storm. Because what Vanessa didn't know, what Ryan had perhaps forgotten, was that Emma hadn't just been a wife all these years. She had built half of his empire with her own hands. She knew every account, every contract, every secret, every weakness. And she looked out at the city below and said, quietly, "You called the wrong woman." Then she ended the call. Somewhere across town, Vanessa probably thought she had one. Ryan probably believed his secrets were still perfectly safe. Neither of them knew that at this exact moment, standing at a high window, with the city spread out before her and 10 years of knowledge in her hands, Emma Parker had already begun counting down. And before it was over, both of them would lose everything. She didn't cry. Not that day. Not that night. Not a single tear. Because Emma Parker understood something most people never learn in time. That grief, however enormous, is a luxury you cannot afford when someone has declared war on your life. So instead of breaking, she opened her laptop. For years, Emma had been more than Ryan's wife. She had been the architect behind half of everything he called his. She knew where every file lived, every system, every password he assumed she had long forgotten. Tonight, that knowledge was a key, and she used it to open every door. Within hours, she found something that made the affair feel almost small by comparison. Ryan wasn't just betraying her heart. He was stealing from the company they had built together, using business accounts as his personal gift fund for another woman, luxury hotel suites, designer handbags, resort vacations, all filed away as business expenses, line after line after line. She scrolled through the evidence with the calm of a forensic accountant and the focus of a woman who had already decided what came next. The total exceeded hundreds of thousands of dollars. She looked at the number, and she felt nothing, except more certain. She leaned back in her chair. The betrayal hurt. Of course it did. 10 years of a life you believed in. That kind of pain doesn't ask permission before it arrives. But the lies hurt more. Because lies are not accidents. They are choices, made every single day, in every small moment, by someone who looked at you and decided you didn't deserve the truth, and then she found something she hadn't been looking for. Hidden deep in the corporate filing system, share transfer documents, ownership records quietly moved into accounts she had never seen before. Not this week, not this month, months ago, carefully, methodically, without a word that he was preparing for a divorce. Not just leaving her with almost nothing, while she had been trusting him, working beside him, building this life with him. He had been quietly, deliberately dismantling her share of it. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a plan. Emma smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a sad one. The cold, precise smile of a woman who has just been handed every piece of evidence she will ever need. Ryan thought he was playing chess. He thought he was 3 moves ahead, the board tilting his way. What he didn't realize, what he had somehow forgotten, was that he had taught her the game and she had already seen every piece. Every move. The entire board. All of it. She closed the laptop. She stood. She walked to the hallway mirror and looked at herself for a long, quiet moment. Then she rearranged her face into something warm. Something soft. Something that looked like a wife who had spent an ordinary evening at home. Because the most powerful thing Emma Parker could do tonight was pretend she knew nothing at all. When Ryan came home, she greeted him with a smile. He kissed her forehead. Casual. Easy. The gesture of a man with nothing on his conscience. Or at least nothing he believed she could see. Emma kept smiling. Her eyes stayed open. He asked how her day was. She told him, quiet. Productive. Fine. He nodded and described his evening, a client meeting, a dinner, completely ordinary. The words came smoothly, naturally, without a single hesitation. He had been lying to her for almost a year. He was very, very good at it by now performance, and Emma played along perfectly. She asked a question. She laughed at the right moment. She was every inch the unsuspecting wife, warm, present, completely believable. But if you watch her eyes above that smile, you would have seen it. The stillness. The absolute, unwavering focus of a woman who is not listening to what he says, but cataloging every word for later that night. Ryan slept easily, and Emma lay beside him in the dark, eyes open, hands folded, completely still, staring at the ceiling of a life she was already, quietly, beginning to take back. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge doesn't begin with a confrontation. It doesn't begin with tears. It doesn't begin with a word spoken out loud. It begins with silence. And Emma Parker's silence had already begun. They say the best performances are the ones where the audience never suspects they're watching one. For 3 weeks, Emma Parker gave the performance of her life. She cooked dinner. She attended events. She smiled for photographs beside the man who had been quietly dismantling her future. And she did it all so convincingly, so completely, that not a single person in their world suspected a thing. Not even Ryan. Especially not Ryan. But behind that perfect smile, something else entirely was being built. Every receipt, every text message screenshot, every fraudulent expense, every illegal share transfer. Printed, dated, labeled, cross-referenced, and placed with surgical precision into a growing set of evidence folders that would eventually tell the complete story of a man who thought he was untouchable. Emma didn't work with emotion. She worked with evidence. And evidence, she understood, was the only weapon that could never be argued away in a courtroom. Then she hired the best divorce attorney in the city. When she sat across from him and watched him review what she had built, page by careful page, she saw the moment it registered on his face. The slight widening of the eyes. The almost imperceptible pause before he turned the next page. He looked up at her. "Your husband," he said, "is going to lose everything." Emma Parker held his gaze for one quiet moment. "Good," she said. One word. One syllable. More power in it than anything Ryan had said to her in the last year combined, but she wasn't finished. Because Emma knew something Vanessa and Ryan had both forgotten. That reputation is built slowly, over years, in 1,000 small moments of delivered excellence. And Emma Parker had spent a decade building hers, brick by careful brick, while Ryan put his name on the door. The board members trusted Emma. The investors trusted Emma. They had watched her work. They knew who had actually built what stood behind Ryan's polished confidence. Quietly, always quietly, she began scheduling meetings. Not dramatic confrontations, not announcements, just private lunches, brief calls, a document passed across the table with one hand while the other held a coffee cup. Just information shared with the right people at the right time. And quietly, precisely, people began to prepare. Meanwhile, across the city, Vanessa was doing something remarkable. She was helping. Every luxury dinner posted online was a receipt Emma could cross-reference. Every expensive gift photographed and captioned was a company charge Emma could match to a document. Every cryptic, triumphant social media post was a thread Emma quietly pulled into her folder and labeled. Vanessa thought she was winning. She was building Emma's case, post by carefully photographed post. After 3 weeks, Emma stood before her evidence wall and surveyed everything she had built. Every document connected, every thread running to the same conclusion. The attorney was ready. The allies were prepared. The evidence was complete and devastating. And that same evening, she sat across the candlelit dinner table from Ryan, refilling his glass, laughing at his stories, asking the questions of a woman who trusted her husband entirely, and not one molecule of what she knew showed on her face. This was the performance. This was the art of it. The trap doesn't look like a trap. That is exactly what makes it a trap. Now, there was only one thing left. The moment. Emma Parker was not the kind of woman who moved before she was ready. She did not act out of pain or impulse or the desperate need to simply do something. She was patient in the way that only truly dangerous people are patient. Not because she was passive, but because she understood that timing is the difference between winning and winning completely. The trap was built. The pieces were in place. The city stretched out below her at dusk. The same city that had watched her smile and assumed she was simply a successful man's successful wife. They were about to learn otherwise. All she needed now was the perfect moment. And it was coming. They say that every trap needs a stage. Ryan Parker built one himself. A company gala, the biggest event of the year. Investors, executives, media, every important person in their world, all gathered in one room. He announced it with the easy confidence of a man who had no idea he was handing his opponent exactly what she had been waiting for. Emma accepted the invitation with a smile. Of course she did. The night of the event, she got ready alone. She sat before the mirror and applied her makeup with steady hands. She pinned her hair into a perfect, low chignon. She put on a single pair of diamond earrings and stepped into a floor-length black silk gown that was, in every possible sense, armor. Elegant, precise, untouchable. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't see a betrayed wife. She saw a woman who had spent 3 weeks building something that was about to change everything. Ryan saw her and felt relieved. She looked perfect. She looked like his wife. She looked like she knew nothing at all. He smiled. She smiled back. And together, they walked into the most important evening of both their lives, for entirely different reasons. The ballroom was everything Ryan had promised. Crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of guests. The kind of room that made you feel like whatever happened inside it mattered to the world. And across that ballroom, Vanessa was waiting. She saw Emma and smiled. The slow, deliberate smile of a woman who believed this evening belonged to her. Emma looked back at her and smiled. Warm, open, completely unbothered. The kind of smile that should have made Vanessa relax. The kind of smile that should have made her afraid. Emma moved through the gala the way she had moved through the last 3 weeks, quietly, precisely, leaving almost nothing visible in her wake. A brief touch on an arm here, a calm nod there, a moment of eye contact with a board member that said everything without saying a word. Everyone was ready. The room was full of her allies, and none of them looked like it. And then Ryan took the stage. He stepped up to that podium in his black tuxedo and gripped it like it had always been his, because in his mind, it had. The room applauded. He smiled broadly. He began to speak. About loyalty. About success. About integrity. The words filled the ballroom, and Emma stood below the stage with her hands folded and her expression perfectly composed, listening to a man describe virtues he had never once practiced. And she let him speak every single word. Because she needed him exactly there. Exactly then. Exactly this confident. And then the screens behind him changed. It happened without warning. One moment, Ryan's company branding. The next, something else entirely. The audience felt it before they understood it. That collective ripple that moves through a crowd when something has gone deeply, publicly, irreversibly wrong. Champagne glasses lowered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. 100 faces turned upward. Ryan turned too, and saw what Emma had built. The screen showed everything. Ryan and Vanessa. Hotel suite reservations under company accounts. Financial records laid out with perfect clarity. Private messages. Expense fraud documented line by line. Share transfers that were never supposed to be found. Proof after proof after proof. Displayed on screens 20 feet tall, in a room full of the exact people who needed to see it. 3 weeks of methodical, precise, devastating work. Playing out in front of the entire city. Ryan froze. The microphone hung from his hand like something he had forgotten how to use. The color left his face. He stared at the screen behind him and saw his own carefully constructed life being disassembled in public, piece by piece, with a precision he never could have imagined. Across the ballroom, Vanessa had gone pale, the champagne glass still in her hand. The smirk completely, permanently gone. The deep red dress she had chosen to look like a winner now made her impossible to miss and impossible to defend. The room fell silent. Completely, absolutely silent. And into that silence, Emma Parker stood up. She rose from her seat without hurry, without drama, with the quiet, total authority of a woman who has been the most prepared person in this building all evening. One by one, heads turned toward her, then more, then all of them. The entire ballroom, every investor, every board member, every executive, every journalist, watching the woman in the black gown stand at her table and face the stage as if she had always known this moment was hers. And she spoke. Calmly, clearly, without a single tremor in her voice. This, she said, is the truth behind our company's success story. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because there was nothing left to say that the screens hadn't already said. Because the evidence was so complete, so publicly displayed, so undeniably real that the room had no mechanism to process it except silence. Emma had not raised her voice once. She had not needed to. Ryan's empire didn't fall loudly. It fell the way all truly finished things fall. Quietly, inevitably, in the small, precise movements of people who have already decided what comes next. A board member reaching for a phone. An investor standing to leave. A journalist whose story had just written itself. Ryan at the podium, holding a microphone with nothing left to say. And Emma Parker, standing in the black silk gown, in the light of the chandeliers, in the city that had watched her smile for years and never looked closely enough, stood completely still. Calm, complete, untouchable. She had not acted out of pain. She had not acted out of anger. She had acted with precision, with patience, and with 10 years of quiet competence that one man had badly fatally underestimated. The speech was over before it finished. The empire was over before the evening ended. And Emma Parker hadn't raised her voice once. To be continued. The morning after the gala, Emma Parker made coffee. She sat at her kitchen window, both hands around the cup, and watched the city wake up. Ordinary, unhurried, completely at peace. On the counter in front of her, the newspaper headline confirmed what she already knew. On her laptop screen, the news outlets had found the story in the night and run with it. By the time the city had its first cup of coffee, the scandal was everywhere. Ryan's name, the company name, the evidence she had built, now being reported, verified, and published by people who had no idea a woman in a black gown had handed it to the world 12 hours ago. The emails arrived in waves. Investors demanding answers. Board members requesting urgent meetings. Legal notices. Formal inquiries. The kind of correspondence that arrives when a carefully constructed lie meets the full weight of documented truth. And Ryan called. Again and again and again. Emma looked at his name on her screen and set the phone face down. She didn't block the calls. She didn't send a message. She simply stopped giving him her attention. And for a man who had counted on her trust for 10 years, that silence was louder than anything she could have said. By the end of the week, it was official. The board met in emergency session and removed Ryan as CEO of the company he had put his name above the door of. The company Emma had spent years quietly making successful enough to put a name above it all. The financial investigations followed immediately. The accounts he thought were invisible. The transfers he thought were buried. The records he assumed would never be found. All of it now in official hands, being worked through with exactly the kind of thoroughness that Emma had anticipated when she built her evidence file to be handed, if necessary, directly to people with the authority to act on it. She had anticipated that, too. The accounts became public, printed in the same newspapers Ryan had invited media to that gala to impress, discussed by the same financial commentators whose approval he had spent years courting. The structure of his deception, the hidden transfers, the fraudulent expenses, the secret share movements, laid out clearly for anyone who cared to read it. And the investors he had believed were loyal? They signed their exit documents without sentiment, without looking back, because loyalty in business, Ryan was learning, is not unconditional, is extended to people who deserve it. And the moment the evidence showed he never had, it was withdrawn with the same quiet efficiency it had always been built on. Everything happened faster than he had imagined it could. That was the part that undid him most completely, not the exposure itself, but the speed of it. He had constructed his exit strategy over months, moved carefully, covered every track. He had believed he had time. What he hadn't understood was that Emma had been 3 moves ahead of him for weeks. And when she moved all at once. The divorce filing arrived at his office on a Thursday morning. He held it in hands that were no longer steady, and read the first page and then the second, and kept reading. Every loophole he had built was already closed. Every account he had hidden was named, with evidence attached. Every legal strategy he had assumed was clever had been anticipated, documented, and preempted by an attorney who had been briefed with the most complete dossier of marital financial fraud the firm had seen in 20 years. He turned page after page looking for the gap. The oversight, the one thing she might have missed. There was nothing, because Emma Parker didn't miss things. She never had. He had just never been paying attention, and somewhere in the middle of those pages, somewhere between the annotated account transfers and the attached evidence and the precision of every single document, Ryan Parker understood something for the first time. He had never truly known his wife. Not really. Not at all. He had seen the smile she offered at dinner parties, the warmth she performed for photographs, the patience she showed when he lied to her face. He had never looked beneath any of it, never wondered what lived behind those composed, attentive eyes, never once considered that the woman who ran his household and built his company and trusted him completely might also be, quietly and completely, the smartest person in any room they had ever shared, because the woman he had betrayed was far smarter than he had ever realized. She had not acted out of fury. She had not acted out of desperation or pain or the need to simply make him suffer. She had acted the way she did everything, with precision, with patience, with complete and total competence. She had given him every opportunity to be the man she had believed he was. And when she finally understood he never had been, she dismantled him with the same quiet efficiency she had used to build everything he stood to lose. That morning, while Ryan sat alone in a half-empty office holding a divorce filing he couldn't find a gap in, Emma Parker walked through the city in the early light. She wasn't running. She wasn't performing. She wasn't planning anything. She was simply walking forward into a life that was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely and completely her own. To be continued. Vanessa had expected many things from Ryan Parker. Protection, loyalty, the continuation of everything he had promised her. The lifestyle, the dinners, the gifts, the feeling of having won something worth winning. What she got instead was a man in a rented apartment who no longer knew how to be impressive. Without his company, without his power, without his money, Ryan had nothing left to offer except excuses. And Vanessa, who had never loved the man so much as the life that came with him, found herself looking across a kitchen table at someone she barely recognized. The broad-shouldered confidence was gone. The polished ease was gone. The man who had ordered the same wine at that Italian restaurant, as if the world existed to serve him, that man had simply ceased to exist. And in his place was someone desperate. The luxury gift stopped. The vacation stopped. The expensive, carefully curated life that Vanessa had believed was permanent and had posted online as proof of her victory disappeared with the same speed that Ryan's empire had fallen. What took its place was argument, blame, the specific, exhausting ugliness of two people who chose each other for the wrong reasons, finally having to sit with that choice without the distraction of money to smooth it over. Romance, it turned out, had never really been there. There had only been an arrangement. And arrangements, when they stop working, reveal exactly what they always were. And so Vanessa did the one thing she had never planned to do. She reached out to Emma. She typed the message slowly, every word costing something she couldn't name, and sent it before she could change her mind. Emma's reply came quickly. One word. Yes. No hesitation. No conditions. No questions. Just the quiet confidence of a woman who had known this moment was coming and had simply been waiting for Vanessa to arrive at it herself. Emma chose a cafe. Bright, warm, public, and arrived first. She ordered coffee and sat at a table by the window and was entirely, completely at ease. Because that is what happens when you have nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. You simply occupy a space and wait. When Vanessa walked in, Emma saw her immediately, and she was nothing like the woman from that first phone call. The confidence was gone. The amusement was gone. The sharp, satisfied voice that had delivered the word Vanessa with such deliberate impact. All of it stripped away by weeks of consequence. What arrived at Emma's table was a tired woman in an ordinary coat, trying to find something to say. Vanessa sat down and looked across the table, and she asked the question she had come to ask. Why did you destroy us? Emma laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. A soft, genuine laugh. The kind that escapes when something catches you completely off guard in its framing. Destroy you. She said it back slowly, the way you repeat a word to examine it from all angles, to understand how it got into the room at all. Because from where Emma sat, where Emma had always sat, that particular word had never applied to her side of this story. Vanessa looked confused. She had prepared for anger. For accusation, for the kind of confrontation that would at least confirm the narrative she had been carrying, that Emma was a wounded woman who had struck back out of pain. What she got instead was Emma, leaning forward across the cafe table slowly, deliberately, and delivering the only words that mattered in the quietest possible voice. No, Vanessa, you destroyed yourselves. The words didn't come with rage. They didn't come with satisfaction or cruelty or the heat of someone who has been waiting to say them. They came the way truth always comes when it has been carried patiently for a long time. Simply, directly, without needing to be anything other than what it was. Silence filled the space between them. And Vanessa sat in that silence and did something she had not done in a very long time. She didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She didn't reach for a version of events that cast herself differently. Because deep down, in the place that had been quietly, insistently true this entire time, she knew nobody had done this to her. She had made choices. Ryan had made choices. They had made those choices together, around a woman they had both decided would simply accept what they gave her. They had simply assumed Emma would never fight back. Neither of them had been victims. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. The part that no framing, no story, no social media post could ever have made comfortable. They had not been caught in something that happened to them. They had built it, deliberately, around the assumption that Emma Parker was someone who could be deceived, dismissed, and left behind with nothing, and that she would stay behind. They were wrong. Emma picked up her coat and stood. She had nothing more to say, because there was nothing more to say. The truth had been stated. It was now Vanessa's to carry or put down, whichever she chose. She walked through the cafe, without hurrying, without looking back, without any of the weight she had been carrying for the last 4 weeks outside. The city was ordinary and bright. Emma stepped into it and moved forward, because that is what you do when the chapter is finished. You close it. You walk out into the light. You stop looking over your shoulder at people who no longer have access to your future. Behind her, through the glass, Vanessa sat at the table in the warm cafe, still quiet, sitting with the weight of everything she now understood. 2 women. 1 story. One of them had spent this whole time waiting to be defeated. The other had never once agreed to be. And that, from the very first phone call to this quiet cafe table, had made all the difference. To be continued. Months passed. The city kept moving. The same skyline, the same morning light, the same streets. But the woman looking at it from the window was not the same woman who had answered an unknown phone call and heard the name Vanessa for the first time. That woman had been living inside someone else's story. This one had her own. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning. Emma signed the last document with steady hands, set down the pen, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the attorney's office. No tears, no relief that had to be performed for anyone watching. Just the clean, complete feeling of a thing being finished properly. She received a substantial settlement. The kind that reflected 10 years of contribution that had never been adequately acknowledged, until the law made it impossible to ignore any longer. But money, Emma understood, was not the victory. Freedom was. For the first time in years, she came home to a space that held no lies. No phone calls taken in other rooms. No questions she already knew the answers to being asked and answered with practiced ease. No performance required of her before she had even made her first cup of coffee. Just her life. Clean, clear, entirely her own. She launched her own consulting firm. She had always known she would, had perhaps known it long before the phone call made it urgent. She chose the office herself. She chose the name herself. She put fresh flowers on the front desk and stood in the doorway on the first morning and looked at her name on the glass and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Like herself, completely, unconditionally, without apology or performance or the careful management of someone else's comfort. Just Emma Parker, in a room she built, ready to work. The clients came immediately, because reputation, unlike power, cannot be taken from someone who built it honestly. Emma had spent a decade earning the trust of every person she worked with, and those people had been watching. They knew who had actually been doing the work behind the name on the door. The moment she opened her own door, they walked through it. Her firm grew quickly. Her name appeared in articles. She presented in boardrooms. She was introduced at events as Emma Parker. Just that, exactly that. And she shook hands with people who had no idea what she had been through, who only saw a sharp, warm, completely capable woman who ran an excellent firm. The woman they once knew as Ryan's wife had become successful in her own right. She had always been. She had just needed the room to show it. Ryan struggled. Not dramatically. Not in any way the world stopped to observe. Just the steady, daily, unglamorous difficulty of being a man whose name now opened nothing. The scandal followed him the way these things do, not loudly, but persistently. A closed expression across a meeting table. A returned business card. A phone call not returned. A door that buzzed open for everyone except him. He had spent years assuming that his success was his built by him, belonging to him, loyal to him. He had not understood, until now, how much of it had been built on foundations he had taken entirely for granted, and every success Emma achieved reminded him of exactly what he had lost. Not the settlement, not the company, not the career. Those were painful, yes, but they were things. Things could be rebuilt, or at least mourned cleanly. What could not be rebuilt was this. He walked past her building one afternoon, her firm's name on the glass, warm light inside, the movement of a business that was alive and growing. And he slowed, and he looked, and he understood something he had no useful way to do anything about. He had not lost a wife who didn't know what he was doing. He had lost a woman who knew exactly what she was worth, who had chosen to stand beside him anyway, who had built half of everything he called his, and who had, ultimately, been far too much for him to deserve. Not just a marriage, not just a company, the best person who had ever stood beside him. He walked away from the building. The city moved around him, indifferent, continuous, unchanged. And behind the glass, in warm, golden light, at her own desk, in her own firm, building her own future, Emma Parker worked, completely unaware he had ever been outside. Because that is what moving forward actually looks like. Not a dramatic turn away, not a final glance over the shoulder, just the quiet, total absorption of a person who has found their own life again and has no remaining energy to spend looking backward. She had started over. She had started better. And the woman who had once been described as Ryan Parker's wife had become, simply and entirely, and at last, herself. 1 year, 365 days since an unknown phone call changed everything. Emma Parker stood on the balcony of her penthouse, and looked out at the city blazing below. Her company was thriving. Her name was on a door she had chosen herself. Her future stretched out ahead of her, wider and more genuinely hers than anything she had imagined, standing at a different window, in a different life, in a different version of herself. The night was warm. The city was brilliant. She was, by every measure that had ever mattered to her, exactly where she intended to be. And then her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it, and for one quiet moment, she remembered the last time an unknown number had changed her life. Then she picked it up, because that is the difference between who she used to be and who she had become. A year ago, answering that call had been an act of instinct, something pulled from her before she could choose otherwise. Tonight, answering was a choice, made freely, without fear of what might be on the other end. Hello, not a question, a greeting. The greeting of a woman who is no longer braced for impact. It was Ryan. She knew his voice in the first syllable. Of course she did. 10 years leaves its mark on the ear, whatever else it does. But the voice was different now. Older, tired, carrying the specific weight of someone who has spent 12 months living inside the consequences of their own choices, with no amount of confidence or polish or charm able to smooth those consequences away. He had been a man who moved through the world with effortless ease. That ease was gone. I miss you. He said it simply, without preamble. The way people say things when they have rehearsed them so many times that the rehearsal has finally stripped them of all performance. Emma looked out at the city, and the words landed and passed through her and found nothing to hold on to. Because that is what genuine healing looks like. Not the absence of feeling, not a wall built around the wound, but a life so fully inhabited, so completely and unapologetically your own, that the things which once had power over you simply no longer have a place to live inside you. The words didn't hurt. They didn't matter. And she hadn't known, until this exact moment, how completely free she had become. She spoke quietly. You don't miss me. A beat of silence from his end. You miss the woman who believed in you. And that was the truest thing she had ever said to him. More true than anything that had passed between them in the last year of their marriage. More honest than anything she had held back during 3 weeks of silent, strategic patience. Ryan didn't miss Emma Parker. He missed the version of himself that Emma Parker's belief had made possible. The man who could walk into a room and own it, who had someone competent and loyal and brilliant standing beside him, who had never had to consider that the foundations beneath him could be removed. That version of himself was gone now, and it was the loss he would never stop carrying. His voice broke. Can we talk? Emma smiled. Not coldly. Not with the satisfaction of someone finishing a war. Not with the controlled, strategic calm of a woman building a case or laying a trap. Just peacefully. The gentle, private smile of someone who has arrived somewhere they worked very hard to get to and is standing in it and is not going back. No, she said. One syllable. Clean and complete and carrying nothing except the truth. Then she ended the call. The way she had ended Vanessa's call a year earlier. Quietly, without drama, with the simple authority of someone removing a thing from their attention that no longer belongs there. But this was different. When she had ended Vanessa's call, there had been a plan forming, a countdown beginning, a whole architecture of consequence being quietly assembled. When she ended this call, there was nothing left to build, only closure, the clean, complete, permanent kind, the kind that doesn't need to be revisited or reconsidered or reopened because it has been finished properly from the inside out. She set the phone down and looked at the city. And she remembered the afternoon it had all begun. The office, the financial reports, the phone vibrating on the desk, the voice, confident, amused, almost playful, saying her name as if it already knew what it was about to do to her. The day a woman called to Gloat. The day she thought she had won. The day she called the wrong woman. Emma almost smiled again, standing on that balcony above the city that was now fully and undeniably hers. Because she understood something now that Vanessa had never understood. That betrayal, for certain kinds of women, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the real one that some women break after betrayal. They fold inward. They shrink. They spend years carrying the shape of the wound, letting it define the borders of what they believe they deserve. Others rebuild. They take the evidence of what was done to them and they use it, not as a weapon against someone else, but as a blueprint for something better, something entirely their own, something that could not have existed without first being broken into its component parts and rebuilt from the foundation. And when those women rebuild, they become something the people who broke them never anticipated. Impossible to dismiss, impossible to overlook, impossible to defeat. Emma Parker placed both hands on the balcony railing and lifted her face to the open sky. The city blazed below her. The night was infinite above, and she stood in it, completely, permanently, beautifully herself. The end.